Hey there nation, welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and we are back with another episode of Cheap Shots, our series that is dedicated to showing you guys how to save money on the wargaming hobby. And on this episode, we're going to show you guys how to cheaply and quickly paint up some Genestealer Cult Jackals. As you can see in this picture here, this will be the end result of what these 5 miniatures look like. If you buy everything on our shopping list for the very first time to paint up in the Cheapskate method, we're talking about a grand total investment of $28.32. And when you compare it to the same materials that Games Workshop, Citadel Paints, as well as Army Painter would charge you, we're talking about a grand total savings of $141.58. So with that being said, let's show you guys how to paint up a squad of Genestealer Cult Jackals and save you $140 in the process. Alright, so first of all, you need to prime and then do a dry brush. Now you might be wondering, Commander Cheapskate, why are there a picture of some Cawdor gangers on this slide when it's supposed to be about jackals from the Genestealer cults? Well, I don't know if you noticed this, but in the background, you can kind of see them in the background there in the back right hand corner. There's my jackals that I started with. When I painted my Cawdor guys, I also painted up my jackals at the same time. Whenever I do a painting project, I actually do 2 painting projects at the same time, so that way when one dries, I can work on the other one and then flip between the two. And I forgot to take photos of my jackals when I first started doing the first couple of steps, so that is why I'm showing you pictures of my Cawdor gangers instead of my jackals there on the right hand corner, so I do apologize. But either way, it's still the same step for a couple of steps. First of all, you need to prime them in the cheapest black primer you can find. I use Rust-Oleum's flat black primer. I got it at my local Walmart for $3.99. Just do a quick once over on the entirety of the jackals to get those done, and then once you're done with that, do a quick dry brush real quick, and then need is acrylic using true gray for the color for that one. And the reason why is because these jackals, I'm not really painting them up for a Genestealer Cult army. I'm painting them more up to make them match my caravan guards for Promethean Guild for our Anarchy Road campaign that we're doing for our channel. And so because I want these guys to have more of like an ashen kind of burnt look to them, and that's the reason why I kind of went with that one for that one. So all you gotta do is just a quick dry brush with some Nita's Gray and ready to move on to your next step. And so the next step after that, of course, you just do a quick dry brush real quick with some Pale Gray by Folk Art. Runs to 75 cents at your local Hobby Lobby. So as you can see, that's exactly what I did there. Just did a quick dry brush with that Pale Gray color to cast the recesses on these guys. Like I said before, I did this to my jackals, which are in the background and the back right, and I forgot to take a photo of it, so I do apologize for that one. Your guys' refund is in the mail. And the very last dry brush is once again another layer of some white by Apple Barrel Paint. Runs at 50 cents at your local Walmart. And once again, you're just doing kind of like a light highlight on that with the dry brushing. What that does, it keeps like this combination of black and gray ashy look for majority of the clothing for your guys' Genestealer Cult Jackals. And like I said before, I forgot to take a photo of it, and that's why I'm showing you my Cawdor guys now. The next photo though, you will go back to the jackals, I promise. Alright, so the next step is a base coat. As you can see, now we're having my photos of my jackals. As you can see, I did exactly the same step with the dry brushing with the Nita's Gray, the Pale Gray, as well as the white, like I showed you with those Cawdor gangers. I did it all over these miniatures. As you can see there, you can see some of the white showing up on the tires and stuff. So once you're done painting those guys up, the next thing you do, of course, is a base coat. You're putting 2 thin layers of Kiwi, which is a color made by Apple Barrel Paint. It's actually a really bright green, almost to the point of almost yellow. It's got a nice kind of like this hazard yellow look to it, like a Dayglow kind of yellow to it. And that's the reason why I like using that color. I put 2 thin coats on all the vehicle bodies that they're riding, for both the dirt bikes as well as the ATV that they're riding. Just put 2 thin coats with Kiwi on this. You don't necessarily need to be too neat at this point, since you're doing mostly just base coating for the most part. And once you're done with that, you're ready to move on for the rest of the detail work. Now for the rest of these slides, we're primarily going to focus on the vehicles that these guys are riding first, just because that's the most prominent part of the miniature. So the first thing you need to do, of course, is put some base coat of some pure gold as well as gunmetal gray. So any parts that are going to be silver or metallic silver on your guys' bikes, put 2 thin layers of metallic gray on, gunmetal gray on there. It's made by Folk Art, runs to 75 cents. And then at the same time, you look like you have these little battery packs that are all over the vehicles that they have for their engines and stuff. So I decided to pick that on 2 thin layers of pure gold by Folk Art, runs to 75 cents at your local Hobby Lobby, and just pick out those metallics on the vehicles real quick. Now for the vehicles as well, the saddles of the vehicles as well as the seats, you need to pick those out in 2 thin coats of Burnt Umber by Apple Barrel Paint. It's a nice dark brown color. Just put 2 thin layers on that for the parts of the seats that are exposed. Now for your Jackals who are riding the dirt bikes, it's not going to be much of an issue because most of the riders are covering the seat anyway, so you won't be able to pick those out. However, on the ATV, I did a sub-assembly where I kept the rider detached, so because I put 2 thin layers of Burnt Umber on his seat, so that way it looks kind of cool at the same time. And then from there, I decided to do some copper accent colors using copper by Folk Art. Runs a 75 cents to the local Hobby Lobby. I did this for most of the hydraulics along the arm of the mining laser on the rig in the back of the ATV. I also did exactly the same thing for the shock absorbers on the bikes that they also have on them as well. And I just put 2 thin layers of that. So now we're done with that. I'm trying to move on to the finer details of the ATV. The ATV actually has quite a bit of cables as well as hose that run all over from the mining laser to the rig that's on the back of it. So because of that, I picked those out in 2 thin layers of Tahiti blue as well as bright magenta for the tubing. And as for the burnt umber, I use that for the strapping and the belting that goes across the back of the cargo netting of these vehicles. So that way it kind of keeps it low down and makes it look like these belts and straps and stuff are running over that as well. You put 2 thin layers of each of these colors. The Tahitian blue run you about 65 cents at your local Hobby Lobby. The bright magenta run you 50 cents at Walmart, and same thing with the burnt umber. Now on these Jackals as well, there's also a lot of different details on these guys. For example, if you look at the side of this bike here, some of these guys have bags, they have demo, they look like they have gas cans and stuff. So in this situation, it's just kind of like your kind of choice what kind of colors you want to use. For example, for me, for the gas cans, I use ripe tomato for that one. It runs you 50 cents at your local Walmart, made by Apple Barrel Paint. Did that for the gas can on that. As you can see in this photo here, you can see some of the metallic work I was talking about earlier. Like for some of the heads I did for the riders, because I replaced their head with Scutari heads, I picked those out in gunmetal gray. As you can see the weapons there, I picked that out in copper as well as gunmetal gray there as well. And so that's some of the detail work that we're starting to see there. So you can see the shock absorbers on the forks that I picked out in copper earlier as well. And the little as well as the engine blocks, the hubcaps, the wheels, and same thing with the battery packs, the vehicles. I picked those out in pure gold. At the same time, on this Jackal particularly, it had a bedroll that was located on it as well. There's also another Jackal that also had like a wrapping full of dynamite that was also attached to the little carriages in the back of the bikes. And because of that, I used Marsh Green by Apple Barrel Paint. It runs at 50 cents at your local Walmart. I did 2 thin layers of that, and then of course I moved on to the next step for the rest of the vehicles. And on some of the Jackals, of course, they also have some looks like demolition and as well as some sensor equipment there on the back of their bikes as well. So because I picked those out in 2 thin layers of H copper by Anita's acrylic, runs about 65 cents at your local Hobby Lobby, and that just added some variety to some of the vehicles. As you can see there, we got like a piece of demo charge. It looks like a landmine on the other side of this Jackal's bike as well. And of course, I just picked those out in 2 thin layers, and I'll add some more metallic colors to add some detail work to it later. So here's a close-up of the detail work on the vehicles. Like I said before, a lot of them have these little different kind of knickknacks on their gear that they have floating around on them. So like cabling, I picked out that in bright magenta, as well as Tahitian blue. Gas can I picked out and bright tomato. For some of the demo work that they also had, I picked that out in metallic H copper by Anita's acrylic. At the same time, for the rest of the weapons, things like the engine blocks, the weapons that they're carrying, as well as the helmets they're wearing, I picked those out in gunmetal gray as well as in copper by Folk Art. And both those products run you 75 cents at your local Hobby Lobby as well. And so all these parts that you see here, I just kind of picked out those details as I went along and just, put 2 thin coats of paint on each of them. And lastly, the last thing we picked out on these vehicles were the headlights for the vehicles, especially for the Jackals in this case. As you can see, I put a thin layer of Dutch Aqua by Folk Art, runs you 75 cents at your local Hobby Lobby. It has kind of like this pale blue, kind of turquoise color, which I thought looked kind of nice on the bikes and contrasted pretty well with it. So I put 2 thin layers of stuff on the headlights, and now that we're done with the vehicles, it's time to move on to the riders. So the vehicle riders is really simple. Like I said before, I wanted to have this ashen gray kind of look going on to the armor. So because we did all the dry brushing earlier in the beginning of the video, most of the armor is already painted on these guys. The only thing we need to paint now is the undergarment that's beneath the armor. In which case I use Anila's acrylic heavy fog, which is a kind of a pale blue, slate blue kind of color that I use on half of the riders. And for the other 3 riders, I used Skyline by Folk Art, which is a nice like darker storm gray color. I did the light 2 different colors of bluish gray to add some contrast between some of the riders, so that way they're not all completely uniformed. And that's pretty much most of the painting that we did for those guys. Are pretty much done for the most part. Alright, the last part I need to work on for the riders for the most part are these tubing and hoses that run across the armor for them. These guys have like a lot of tubing that goes to the respirators as well as for their helmets. In this case, I use Winter Green by Apple Barrel Paint and runs you 50 cents at your local Walmart. Just put 2 thin coats of that on all their gear and they're pretty much ready to go. So because of that, the riders are done, the vehicles are done. It's a really quick paint job to paint these guys up, and the next step after that now is to do an oil wash. So like I mentioned earlier, this is a quick paint method, so because of that we do one single wash, which is an oil wash. We use Midwax Poly Shades Mission Oak color. It's a beautiful dark brown color. I cut the color of it with a little bit of paint thinner to kind of thin it out a little bit, so that way it's not overpowering in its darkness. And I did an all over wash all over the entirety of the miniature. As you can see, it blends the colors, the dry brushing together to the base coat and blends those colors together and smooths out those transitions. At the same time, the oil wash also seeps into the recesses of the miniature, bringing out a lot of the detail as well, giving this guy kind of like a grimy look to him as well. Now my suggestion to you is to wait 24 hours for this stuff to dry and cure, because it is a polyurethane, so it does create a hard coat on the outside of it. The only problem is that when it dries, it has this bright candy coated sheen to it, and if you don't like that, my suggestion to you is use spray varnish. Using a matte varnish might mute that down. And of course, if you like that bright colored candy coated look to them, by all means you can skip that step. For my situation though, I decided to put a matte varnish on these guys. I use Krylon matte spray, which runs you about $5.99 at my local Walmart. So just did that real quick on these guys and mute down the sheen. And now it's time to work on the bases. In this case, I painted their texture to their bases with pewter gray. It's a nice kind of medium gray color by Apple Barrel Paint. Runs you 50 cents at your local Walmart. I just did a single coat on it. And if some of the undercoat bled through, it was not a big deal, because I'm going to be doing a wash on those bases anyways and do dry brushing, so it doesn't really matter. And as you can see in the background there, I'm working on some Savage Works right now. So like I said before, whenever I work on a project, I work on multiple projects, that way I can work between them as I'm painting and letting stuff dry. Alright, so once I'm done with that, the next step of course is to do a dry brush. And once again, I'm using Pale Gray by Folk Art. We used the same product earlier when we did the dry brushing on the miniatures. Just do a real quick rough dry brushing on all the texturing on the base. And the reason why is because these guys are supposed to be driving around the ash wastes of Necromunda, and the ash wastes sound exactly what they sound like, that they're named after. It's supposed to be nothing but grimy, ashy nastiness out in the wasteland, so it just has this nice kind of ashen look to it as well. So just do that real quick, do a quick dry brush, and now we move on to a basic glazing wash. So to do the wash on this, I just did a quick glaze. What I did is I took some burnt umber, which is made by Apple Barrel Paint. I put some inside of a mixing pot. I then threw some water inside of it until it was about the consistency of milk. And then from there, I just washed the bases of these miniatures with that burnt umber. I put 3 coats of this wash, let it wash on there, let it dry, add another wash again, let it dry, and add another wash one more time to let it dry. And it gives you this kind of ashen, dusty, grimy, oily, wasteland look. That looks really, really awesome as well. And that's all you need to do for a glaze, really. When you glaze a miniature, all you do is you mix the paint with water and just add slow layers on top of it. The only hard part about it is you gotta wait for the paint to dry. But if you do it thin enough, it dries pretty quickly. It took me about 30 minutes to do the washing on the bases of this. And once that's done, we're done with the texturing. And finally, the last step on these miniatures is to paint the rim of the bases. I put 2 thin coats of Skyline by Folk Art, because that's the same color I use for all my Necromunda miniatures, and it looks really, really awesome as well. These guys look like they're ready to bring the pain on the white line nightmare that is the Ash Wastes. And here's the end result that we showed you guys earlier at the beginning of the video. As you can see, these guys look nice and grimy. They also look like they're really ashy and wasted out, and they also look like they're driving across the earthed out wastelands of the Ash Wastes. So now that we're done showing you guys how to paint these guys up in the Cheapskate method, what we're going to do now is run down a shopping list that you'll need to do to buy from Citadel and Army Painter in order to paint exactly the same way we did with these guys, except using the main brand paints. And with that, let's get that shopping list on a roll. So assuming that you're purchasing all these Citadel and Army Painter supplies for the very first time, let's give you the shopping list of things you'll need to purchase in order to paint these Jackals the same way we did, except by using the name brand paint. So first of all, you need to buy a can of Chaos Black Spray to do the priming on the miniatures. That runs you $17. You'll then need to dry brush these miniatures with Flanesh Gray, Ulthuan Gray, and White Scar, which all runs you $4.55 for those. At the same time, you also need to buy a jar of Moot Green, which runs you $4.55 for all the parts that are done in the vehicles, for the bodies of the vehicles. Now for your metallics in the vehicles, you'll need to buy Leadbelcher and Retributor Armor, both run you $7.80 as well. For all the parts that we did with the Burnt Umber, you'll need to buy Wildwood, which runs you $7.80 for that as well. And for all the parts that we did in Copper, you'll need to buy Screaming Bell, which runs you $7.80 for that. Now for the parts that we did in Tahitian Blue as well as Ripe Tomato, you'll need to buy Baharoth Blue and Troll Slayer Orange, which runs you $4.55 for those. And for the headlights in the vehicles, you'll need to buy Caliban Green, runs you $4.55. Now for some of the demo as well as some of the other accessories on the back of the Jackals, you buy a pot of Brass Scorpion, runs you $7.80. And for the tubing of the body, for the tubing on their helmets and stuff, you'll need to buy Air Thematic Blue, runs you $7.80. Now for the undergarments that they're wearing beneath their armor, you'll need to buy a Aethermatic Blue, which is $7.80, as well as Fenrisian Gray, which is $4.55, and Rust Gray, which is also $4.55 for those garments as well. And now for the parts for the headlights, as well as the breathing tubes, you'll need to buy Gauss Blaster Green, which runs you $4.55. Now, since this is a quick paint method, you'll need to buy a pot of Army Painter Strong Tone, runs you $32 even in order to paint that with the oil wash. And then you, of course, need to buy a can of Munitorium Varnish for that matte finish, runs you $19.50 for that. And of course, the last thing you do, of course, is the dry brushing of the bases with Slaanesh Gray and Ulthuan Gray, which runs you $4.55 for those. Now, assuming you buy everything for the very first time, you're talking about a grand total investment of $169.90. Now, when you compare that with the Cheapskate method of $28.32, you're talking about a grand total savings of $141.58. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That's how you guys can quickly as well as cheaply paint up some Genestealer Cult Jackals, and at the same time saving $140+. As always, you guys, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is invaluable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blogger.com for all the latest, greatest hobby news related to our channel. That's good for this one, you guys. We'll catch you guys next one. Peace out and stay classy.